I always believed I had time. Not in an arrogant way. Not like I thought I was invincible or immune to consequences. It was quieter than that. More reasonable. I believed time was generous. Flexible. Something that would wait for me to be ready. I told myself that nothing important needed to happen now. There would be time later. That belief shaped my entire life. Whenever I felt uncertain, I postponed. Whenever a choice felt heavy, I delayed it. I convinced myself that patience was wisdom, that rushing was dangerous, that clarity would arrive naturally if I just waited long enough. I wasn't lazy. I was careful. At least, that's what I told myself. People around me seemed to move forward with confidence I didn't feel. They committed to paths, relationships, decisions. I watched them from a safe distance, telling myself I was simply more thoughtful, more cautious, more aware of consequences. I thought waiting meant I was protecting myself from mistakes. What I didn't realize was that I was also protecting myself from living. Time felt abstract back then. Days were full, weeks passed quickly, years arrived without warning. But because nothing dramatic went wrong, I assumed everything was fine. I wasn't unhappy. I wasn't desperate. I was functional. That made it easy to ignore the quiet discomfort. The feeling that my life was slightly out of sync. That I was always preparing instead of participating. That I was standing just outside of moments instead of stepping into them. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself I was gathering strength. Gathering information. Gathering courage. I told myself I'd step in when I felt ready. Readiness became my excuse. I waited to say what I felt until the timing was perfect. I waited to leave situations that drained me until I had a better plan. I waited to start things that scared me until I felt more confident. Waiting felt harmless. Because life kept going. Bills got paid. Days stayed busy. Conversations happened. I aged without noticing. Everything looked normal from the outside. But something subtle was happening inside me. I stopped feeling urgency. When urgency disappears, desire follows. I didn't stop wanting things completely. I just stopped wanting them enough to act. Every desire was softened by a thought that sounded responsible: there's no rush. I watched opportunities pass without panic. I watched people change, move on, grow distant. I assumed everything important would circle back when the timing was right. I trusted time more than I trusted myself. I remember the first moment that trust cracked. It wasn't a crisis. It wasn't dramatic. It was a quiet realization that arrived without warning. I was thinking about something I had wanted years ago, something I used to imagine often, and I realized I no longer felt anything about it. No excitement. No sadness. Just distance. That scared me. Not because I had lost the opportunity. Because I had lost the feeling. I realized I hadn't failed to act once or twice. I had built a habit of postponement. And that habit had slowly trained me not to care too deeply about anything that required risk. Time had been moving. I had been standing still, telling myself I was being patient. I began to notice how often my plans lived in the future. How rarely I committed to the present. My life felt like a waiting room. Comfortable enough to stay in. Empty enough to forget why I was there. The most dangerous part was how reasonable it all sounded. I'll do it when I'm more stable. I'll decide when things are clearer. I have time. No one ever challenged that belief. Time didn't either. It just kept going. And slowly, without asking, it began to decide for me. The moment I realized that time hadn't been waiting for me, something inside me broke. Not loudly. Not suddenly. It cracked the way ice does under steady pressure, silently, invisibly, until one day you step forward and everything gives way. I started noticing time everywhere. In how people spoke about memories I barely remembered being part of. In how faces around me changed while I stayed strangely the same. In how conversations began with, "Do you remember when?" and I realized I remembered the facts, but not the feeling. That's when panic finally arrived. Not the kind that makes you run. The kind that makes you freeze. I understood then that waiting hadn't kept me safe. It had kept me inactive. While I was waiting for certainty, life was busy closing doors I assumed would always remain unlocked. Opportunities didn't disappear dramatically. They expired quietly. People didn't leave angrily. They moved on naturally. Paths didn't collapse. They narrowed. And the terrifying part was this: none of it felt unfair. Time hadn't betrayed me. I had handed it control willingly. I replayed moments I had dismissed as insignificant. Choices I postponed. Conversations I delayed. Chances I told myself I would revisit soon. Each one had felt small. Reasonable. Temporary. Together, they formed a pattern of absence. I began to see my past not as a series of mistakes, but as a series of non-decisions. I hadn't chosen wrong paths, I had avoided choosing at all. I had let momentum replace intention. And momentum doesn't care what you want. It only cares where you already are. That realization hit me harder than regret ever could. Because regret implies action. What I felt was responsibility. I couldn't blame circumstances. I couldn't blame people. I couldn't even blame fear, because fear had always offered itself honestly. The truth was simpler and more painful. I had trusted time because I didn't trust myself. I didn't trust my instincts. I didn't trust my desires. I didn't trust that I could survive choosing something that might fail. So I waited for certainty. And certainty never came. Instead, time slowly removed my options. I felt anger then, sharp, sudden anger, but it had nowhere to go. Not at life. Not at anyone else. Only inward. Anger at how calmly I had surrendered my agency. At how often I had chosen comfort disguised as patience. I saw how much I had normalized postponement. Not now. Soon. When things settle down. Those phrases had become my philosophy. I realized something brutal: time doesn't punish you for waiting. It rewards you with irrelevance. The world keeps adjusting without you. Decisions get made in your absence. Roles get filled. Lives continue. And one day you realize that stepping in now would require disrupting an order that no longer includes you. That was the true breakdown. Not the loss of opportunities, but the loss of position. I felt late to my own life. I thought about intervening earlier, about what might have been different if I had acted when desire was still loud and fear was still negotiable. That thought hurt so badly I almost retreated back into numb acceptance. Because acknowledging lost time means grieving it. And grief is heavier than waiting. The moral dilemma became unavoidable. Do you keep waiting so you never have to admit how much you've already lost? Or do you intervene now and face the full weight of regret head-on? Waiting still felt tempting. It promised dignity. Acceptance. Peace. It whispered that it was already too late, that changing direction now would only expose how wrong the delay had been. Time is cruel in that way. It uses shame to keep you passive. I stood there, mentally frozen, knowing that both choices would hurt. If I waited, I would slowly disappear, not in a dramatic way, but in a way no one would notice. If I acted, I would have to confront the grief of years spent standing still. There was no painless option anymore. And that was the clearest sign that time had already taken its toll. I realized then that the real cost of waiting wasn't lost chances. It was lost courage. I had trained myself to delay so thoroughly that choosing felt unnatural, almost reckless. My instincts felt weak, underused. My confidence felt theoretical instead of lived. But beneath that fear, something else remained. Anger. Grief. And a quiet, stubborn refusal to disappear completely. Time had taken a lot from me. But not everything. Not yet. The question was no longer whether I had time. The question was whether I was willing to face what waiting had already cost, and still choose to step forward. The moment I finally stepped in didn't feel like courage. It felt like shame. That's what people don't tell you about late choices. When you act early, it looks brave. When you act late, it looks like panic, even to yourself. I wasn't proud of intervening. I was painfully aware of how long I had waited. I didn't move forward because I felt ready. I moved forward because staying still had become unbearable. Time had already taken so much that continuing to wait felt like consent to disappear completely. Not metaphorically. Practically. Quietly. Permanently. So I chose. And the first thing I felt was grief. Not regret, grief. Grief for the years I had spent preparing instead of living. Grief for the chances that no longer existed because they had required a younger version of me. Grief for the person I could have been if I had trusted myself earlier. That grief didn't fade quickly. It sat with me in the aftermath of every decision. Every step forward reminded me how late it was. How much harder everything felt now. How many paths had already narrowed beyond reopening. Intervening didn't give me back what time had taken. It only stopped the bleeding. That was its quiet power. The consequences of choosing late arrived immediately. Some people didn't understand why I was changing things now. Others treated my decisions like inconveniences, disruptions to a version of me they had already adjusted to. A few gently implied that I should have acted sooner. They weren't wrong. And that hurt more than anger ever could. Because late choices don't come with applause. They come with raised eyebrows, cautious reactions, and the silent question everyone asks but no one says out loud, why now? I asked myself that too. The answer was simple and devastating, because now was all that was left. I didn't suddenly become confident or fearless. Every decision felt heavier than it would have years earlier. The margin for error was smaller. The cost of mistakes was higher. But something had changed fundamentally. For the first time, my life was responding to me. Not to habit. Not to momentum. Not to waiting. To choice. Even when the outcomes weren't ideal, they were mine. Even when things didn't work out, they left marks, real ones. Evidence that I had been present instead of postponed. Time felt different once I intervened. Slower. Sharper. Less forgiving, but more honest. Days stopped slipping past unnoticed. Moments mattered again, even painful ones. I could no longer hide behind the illusion that nothing has happened yet. Things were happening now, with or without my approval. And I was finally involved. I stopped asking myself whether it was too late. That question leads nowhere. Instead, I asked something harder, what happens if I don't choose now? The answer was always the same. Time would choose for me again. And I had learned exactly how that ends. I don't romanticize this ending. This isn't a story about redemption or reinvention. I didn't suddenly become the person I once imagined. Some losses are permanent. Some doors stay closed. Late choices don't erase consequences. They only change the direction of what remains. And that matters more than people admit. Because even a smaller life can still be a lived one. Even a narrowed future can still belong to you. I stopped measuring my life by what I had missed and started measuring it by something else, presence. Was I here? Was I choosing? Was I paying attention? If the answer was yes, that was enough. I understand now why waiting feels safer than choosing. Waiting keeps hope abstract. Choosing makes everything real, including failure, limitation, and regret. But waiting also hands your life over to time. And time does not negotiate. It moves. It takes. It decides. Unless you interrupt it. I thought I had time. I was wrong. Time moved on without me, and it would have kept going forever if I hadn't stepped in when I did. I don't get my past back. I don't get lost years returned. What I get is this moment. And this moment is the only place where life still listens. So if you're hearing this and something inside you feels late, heavy, overdue, understand this: late is not the same as over. Regret is not the same as failure. And choosing now is infinitely better than being chosen away later. I thought I had time. Then life moved on without me. The moment I stopped waiting, it stopped leaving. And that, even now, is enough to keep going.